Well people, it's that time again where I delve back into somebody I've not delved into for a very long time now, and the last time I did so, it raised quite a few eyebrows amongst the social justice community and a particular fandom of a particular rapper from a particular part of the world in a particular part of the UK. I'm of course talking about Akala and his dumb video on racism and its history and how he got everything wrong, and that triggered quite a lot of people. It's still one of my most downrated videos, so if you want to go check that out and rectify that issue, please do so. Link in the description. Now Akala, we have some unfinished business now, don't we?
The propaganda of British values is a distortion of history.
You hear that, people? British values are apparently propaganda, or at least there's propaganda about these British values. I don't know which he's referring to, but let's just say that he's saying that there's propaganda about it. Well, is he saying that it's not been all hunky-dory, we've not always cherished these values or clung on to these values the way we should do, or even expressed them to other people than we would do to ourselves? That would be true. History has proven that. It's all there in the pudding. But that doesn't mean that we haven't also stayed true to these values, and especially nowadays, we definitely try to. But is he saying that they don't exist? That it's just a propaganda and that what we are is something completely different? I don't know. Let's find out, people.
What does it mean to be British?
Well, it's up to the individual to decide what makes them British. I don't know what makes my mum feel British. I don't know what my dad thinks about it. In fact, it's been different in many different centuries and millenniums. In the ancient Greek days, it was that place where you get tin. In the Roman days, it was that weird tribal place up north, which they eventually conquered, which they labelled Britannia. To the Roman or British, it was home being invaded by Saxons. To the Saxons, it was a new home to call their own. To the Scottish and the English, who formed the Union to begin with, this was the start of a brand new country, a brand new era in the union of these two countries which had already shared a royal family for so many years. It's changed depending on the people who were living in that particular century or decade, and it'll forever change as long as there is a Britain. There are things that probably link us all throughout the years, maybe a sense of freedom, self-expression that many other countries didn't have until the 19th century, maybe, I don't know. Again, it's different. I feel completely different to you, Akala, and you seem to have a chip on your shoulder that's anything remotely British, it seems, from what I can gather.
Many things have apparently come to define British values. Winston Churchill, the monarchy, empire, received pronunciation, aristocracy.
I'm sorry, but I don't think it's those people that define what Britishness is, because they're just British icons or things from British history. It's the values inherent in our belief system that has been passed down to us from the Magna Carta to the Bill of Rights to the Glorious Revolution to all the other amazing acts of legislature that we've created that has expressed the most freedom in Europe for a very long time now. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to see what your government is talking about so that you know what to vote for, what to expect from them, because that used to be illegal. I could go on, there's loads of things that are so obvious to me that I just can't remember right now. I don't think those people define what British things are, all those things. It's the values. You don't even think about them because you express it all the damn time. And then once they're gone, you then realise what it means for all of us and how it defines us.
Whiteness.
I'm sorry, what? Since when did whiteness have anything to do with British values or was a British value? Who exactly, other than the BNP and maybe some fringe members in UKIP and God knows where else, think that exactly? Because there's been people like us for a very long time on this green and pleasant land. Since the Roman times, I do believe. Sure, they weren't British, but neither were the people after them until 1707. So even then, there were black people, Indian people, Moorish people living in Britain at that time and had been for quite a while now. They were British, and I don't think even then the colour of their skin defined the British values. No, it had all to do with the things that they believed in as a country. In fact, why else would Scotland and England combine together if they did not share some kind of core values with each other that wasn't just the fact that they shared the same monarch? These things go beyond race, and just because you are obsessed with race and you see race everywhere doesn't mean that has anything to do with British values. I think it's been proven quite a few times that as much as some people will try and make that part of it, it's been shunned, not just by the government but by the British people.
But some of the people of this island have a much more interesting, subversive, countercultural set of traditions buried beneath the surface.
You know, the idea of barons having a little bit more power than the king in many areas was quite a countercultural and very subversive idea back in the 1200s, mate. What makes these people that you're talking about so special that they should be up there with the people who helped create the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights in the 1600s? Because it better be good. And are these values actually the same by any chance? sense. These people believe in equality and all these other things like the Bill of Rights and all these other laws that we've created throughout the years that aren't authoritarian, which help increase people's freedom and security. I'm just wondering, are these as good? Are these the same? They better be, because you're now hyping things up.
These traditions don't fit the elite's message that they alone are responsible for everything that's good in society.
Okay, so are we going to have modern examples, or are we going to have just old examples from history where these people's impact has already been felt since they clamoured for change, or they clamoured for some kind of value change that we now take for granted? Because I have a feeling we're going to go back in time as per usual to somehow suggest that there's some kind of propaganda. Because by the way, yeah, the elites have a different idea of what the country should be to the people, at least insofar as there are certain differences between different viewpoints. I mean, yeah, poor people would like to be richer, while the rich people will not want to give their wealth to the poor people unless they are of a more socialist bent or perhaps more of a charitable bent. I don't know. Yes, there are things like that. These things are inherent in the systems that we live in, and
therefore, it's no surprise that most of us learn more at school about Henry VIII's marital dramas than we do about the Peterloo massacre.
It's interesting that you bring up Peterloo as a subculture of people who are different from our establishment's apparent values, even though Peterloo happened almost 200 years ago, and they were the outsiders of their time. Now we take their views for granted. Nobody wants to take away the right of working class men's votes at all. How are these people who lived 200 years ago, who eventually won their battle, apparently different to the establishment of today? Because the people who were descended from them now run the country, and we take the ideals that they fought for granted. We now have those things enshrined within us, when before we did not. Now we do. So how are these people different? Why are you reaching out into the past where we now accept these things that they fought for?
These are the traditions embodied by striking miners, peasants revolting against private tyranny, and by the suffragettes.
Now, other than the miners' strike, which I'll get to, all those other examples are incredibly old and not as relevant to today than they were at the time. These were people, the suffragettes, the peasants, who won their battles. With the peasants, they ended up winning eventually through the force of their ideas alone, and also the fact that the establishment back then realised that the poll tax and giving women the right to vote were actually good ideas for society. Yes, they were the outsiders of their day, but ultimately their ideas won, have now become, again, as I said before, with the men of the Peterloo massacre, enshrined within our laws and our values. Funnily enough, they changed the British values for the better, because as I said, they constantly change. Now with the miners' strike, well, that's something that we're still feeling the effects of today, because it was only 30 years ago, 32 to be exact. We still have a government that believes in Thatcher's philosophy. We still have a working class that is being pounded by said people, and these were people who lost. Yes, they were the outsiders, but they lost. Whether or not their ideals will win overall, I don't know. So far, history has shown that it isn't winning, but that could change in another 30 years. That is the one example that, yes, I can give you, only because we're still feeling the effects of it today. The others were not. Their values won overall. They're now part of our system, but the miners' strike, no, not yet.
Also embodied by William Cuffey, the disabled black man from Kent, who led the 19th century Chartist movement for free speech.
Now you see, you're trying to put a racial thing on this, because as you said before, whiteness is apparently part of British values. Yet that guy was the leader of a whole political movement. Oh, and by the way, he was not black, he was mixed race. His dad was black and a former slave from St. Kitts, and his mother was a white English woman. So don't go and start lying and misrepresenting people. At least if you're going to do a history video, at least get your facts right and present things the way that they were. So actually, he's my hero, alright? He's not one of yours. And none of his people seemed to consider his skin colour to be an issue, and neither did he think that skin colour was an issue. For him, it was class. And again, you're getting it ass backwards. And again, eventually, their ideals and their ideas won, because eventually we ended up with the Labour Party, with new labour rules, with working class people getting the right to vote. Finally, he won. His ideals, his values are now enshrined in ours. And again, this is history that's high level that kids don't understand. It's like Justicar when he says how you teach maths is you teach them some things and then you show them another thing that they weren't even aware of, because then it gives them a whole new perspective and how to do other things easily. It's like that, only not as highbrow, I would say. What I don't get, Akala, is when you're mentioning that whiteness is apparently considered part of British values, that you then decide to use examples of mostly white people fighting for the rights of all Britons, and then your one example was a mixed race man, who, by the way, was fighting class struggles, not race struggles, and didn't seem to suffer much racial problems, that he couldn't be accepted as a leader. I'm not saying that he didn't receive racism, of course he did. He was a mixed race guy, he gets it even worse. But your examples are poor, and that was the worst thing you could possibly have said, and now you've just disproven your own point. Because British people have been shown that they can work with anybody if their ideas are good.
A tradition embodied by the John Brown Women's Society from Sheffield, who refused to make manacles for factories that supported slavery, but because they were poor and women to boot, their names have vanished into history.
Again, it's because they were poor. Nobody really remembers a lot of the Peterloo people's names. Sure, we remember the dead because they died, but we don't remember the people who were alive and continued to struggle for the vote. We don't remember the working class women in the early feminist movement because all the people, all the main voices, all the main support came from the upper classes, like the Pankhursts. We remember them because of their status, and also because they were leaders and very vocal. But yet, you still remember what they did. You still remember their collective name, which, to be honest, I think is probably what they would rather prefer. The fact that what they did is remembered rather than who they necessarily were. And they weren't the only people doing that. There were loads of people who were against slavery around that time, and even later on when we'd outlawed it. Nameless Manchester cotton factory workers signed a petition and a letter and sent it all the way to America to tell President Lincoln that they were not going to work with any cotton that was picked in the South because they did not like slavery and empathized with the black slaves, because even though they didn't have the exact same living conditions, it was similar enough for them to understand that yes, these are our fellow human beings suffering. So apparently, again, this whole thing that you concocted fails completely.
A tradition whose legacies include Notting Hill Carnival, Europe's largest street festival, which was born out of multicultural anti-racist activism in what was, 50 years ago, one of London's poorest areas.
Before I answer this next point, you do realise that, again, those values won in the end because, again, we outlawed slavery and we refused to back the American South in the American Civil War like they thought we were going to do. These people won. And again, you're going so far back in the past that these people, their values are in ours. The establishment now believes in somewhat of a similar fashion to these people. They might not necessarily believe that working class people and workers in general should have a lot of rights that protect them or anything like that, because that's the type of government that we have. But at least they believe in stuff like the vote, and that they should have at least some protection, even if it's not a lot. I have to give them that amount of credit. But to answer the Notting Hill thing, yeah, their values won overall. Again, it didn't really have anything to do with the fact they were multicultural. That did help because, again, that's white people, black people, Indian people, all sorts, working together to form social cohesion, to form unity. Those were the things that allowed them to become successful and to combat racism. And now we have those values, although we probably already did, because they clearly did, and William Coffey clearly had them, and his followers. So what are you saying? All these people won, all these values are now part of our values. You've not proven anything, because your examples are so far back in the past. That, yes, Notting Hill Festival was formed 40 years ago, but unlike the miners' strike, where we're still having issues with workers' rights, in regards to stuff like that, not as much.
Today, these traditions are embodied by activists, youth workers, school teachers, and nurses that go the extra mile for the people they are trying to serve.
All you've proven is such propaganda actually doesn't exist. You've proven that British values change throughout the years, but that some things remain the same, but weren't necessarily followed by a particular group of people up above who had their own ideas, but were later changed or convinced of these ideas, or a new generation came in after the ones who fought for those ideas, and now we have them. It's not today that we now do it, it seems.
These traditions have often been persecuted and even labelled anti-British or anti-state, until they bear fruit that the state then wants to claim for itself.
I don't think the state actually has claimed anything for themselves, especially as we're shown who actually came up with these ideas. Also, maybe, just maybe, the people who fought for those ideas to be established became the establishment.
Such as poor people getting the right to vote or the abolition of child labour. These gains are then presented as the result of inherent British values rather than as the results of serious political struggle that they in fact were.
But that's because they're using the benefit of hindsight. That's why they say they've always been British values, because people tend to forget a lot of the things that led up to that point. This sentiment tends to come from people who lived after said events occurred, mainly, say, about 50, 100, several centuries later, who have taken for granted these things that were once fought for. Nobody's taking any credit for anything. It's just how humans work in regards to looking back at the past or looking looking into the future or at the present. We can barely think about the next 6 months, let alone a century.
Whilst I am not a nationalist, how national peoples and cultures see themselves undoubtedly has real-world implications.
Or is it the fact that, I highly doubt it's what they think of themselves. I think it's more what they think they can do that has real-life consequences. What you described is basically egotism of leaders.
The question in these tumultuous times is, which of the traditions of the people of this island will you be drawing on and identifying with? The one that promotes and reinforces race and class oppression and explains away the genocide of empire as a civilizing mission.
I'm sorry, but where has the state, both Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, etc., actually tried to wave away the bad actions of the empire? And also, can you prove that it was genocide? Can you actually prove that they've done this? Because not even Niall Ferguson denies stuff like that. By the way, he's an historian, people, Conservative historian. He's not a politician. He's actually married to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, funnily enough. I've actually not seen any of this so-called establishment that thinks widely different from us because, funnily enough, they get voted in by people who think like them. So they must reflect our society in some way, right? They must have taken things that we also take for granted from these great people from the past. I mean, you mentioned Henry V. You mentioned Henry VIII as if he's just some embarrassing womanizer. But actually, if he hadn't broken away from the Catholic Church, we might not have the secular society that we have today. Your whole argument is that the people think radically different from the government or from the establishment, when really they don't. Otherwise, why would these people vote for these people? Why would these people think like them? Why is it that people in the establishment adopt these ideas or are brought up on these ideas? Think about that, Akala. And you seem to be doing a with us or against us thing, because as far as I'm aware, that's not the question of these tumultuous times. I think the British people have spoken in that they want the best bits, not the bad bits. But we remember the bad bits so that we don't repeat the bad things of history.
Or the one of relentless activism that secured for us the very fragile freedoms that we have today.
And currently that activism is trying to remove our rights, not give us more rights. Anyway, people, I've had enough of this guy. I'm not going to say anything more. That was round 2 of my battle with him. Can't wait to trigger his fans. So until next time, people, I'll see you all later.